Okay, I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone make this comparison? Between these two devices, they have nothing in common. This is a drum computer, synthesizer. This is a groovebox and synthesizer. And I guess drum computer. And I suppose this is a groovebox when you think of it. So you know what? Maybe they do have a lot of things in common. These are devices that are trying to help you make music at the end of the day. Maybe you're trying to choose which one of these is the right one for you. Well, that's exactly what this video is going to try to help you do. So let's not waste our time. We have a lot of things to unpack. Let's dig right in. So let's start by comparing how they sound. I'm not going to go into all the technical details, but I will mention the most important things. First off, both are very capable and well-sounding synthesizers, and both technically give you deep access to their synth engines. Here's a couple of sounds from the Syntakt. And here's another sound. More of an FM tone. And here's a couple of sounds on the MC-101. And here's a pad sound from the Jupiter 8. And you may have noticed that I was able to play a full chord with that sound, and this is one of the key differences between the two grooveboxes. The MC-101 is polyphonic, whereas the Syntakt is monophonic. All of the 12 tracks on the Syntakt can still play at the same time, but only one note per track. Now, on the Syntakt, every single sound you hear is generated by the synth engine. Drums, leads, bass, all of it. And you have access to both digital and analog oscillators. Whereas on the MC-101, the drums are technically not synthesized, but instead they're sampled. And this leads us to the second key difference here. The MC-101 can play back samples, and the Syntakt cannot. This means that you can make it sound like anything you want by loading in your own samples from an SD card. You can make it sound like a choir, or you can make it sound like a distorted guitar. Or you can make it sound like a saxophone. Or you could make it sound like someone laughing hysterically because a cat just fell down on the carpet from a chair. That's the power of samples. The MC-101 comes with thousands of sound presets, and it also has a number of drum kits to choose from. Here's a couple of examples. So this is the TR-606 drum kit, and what you can do is you go into presets and you can audition different kits live with your currently playing pattern. I really appreciate that you can audition a drum kit on the fly like this without committing to it, and the same is true for tone tracks too, so this makes finding the perfect sound for your melody really easy. The Syntakt doesn't have drum kits. Instead, you change sounds on a track-by-track basis, and you can't audition sounds on a playing pattern. So the Syntakt is a little bit less immediate when it comes to auditioning sounds. The last key difference is effects, where the MC-101 has another edge because it has something like 50 plus built-in effects that can be applied on either a per-track basis or on a master channel. So you could load a flute sound preset and run it through distortion, followed by a chorus and a reverb, and that would sound something like this. On the Syntakt, on the other hand, you basically have 3 to 4 effects depending on how you count. So you have a reverb and a delay as 2 master sends, and then you can add overdrive on a per track basis, and finally you have an analog effect block which can add analog drive. You can choose which tracks to send through this effect block. So let me give you one example. Here's how a bass drone sounds dry. And here's how that sounds like if I run it through the effect block. And I add some delay and reverb. Alright, so now I'm going to give you my 2 cents on the sound of these two devices. I think of the MC-101 as a bit of a best of device when it comes to classic Roland synths. So I'm thinking of things like the Juno 106, the Juno 60, the Jupiter 8, drum machines like the 707 and things like that. Syntakt is instead like a best of Elektron synths. So you have things like FM synthesis from the modeled cycles, and you have drum machines from the analog rhythm and things like that. For me, I think it's cool that the MC-101 has a wide range of sounds, but to be perfectly honest, I never use a saxophone sound in my music. I'm interested in actual synthesizer sounds for the most part. And within that more narrow range, I would describe the MC-101 as more classic sounding, and the Syntakt sounds more modern and futuristic. That's just my totally subjective opinion, so take that for what it's worth. I would say though that the difference in how these devices sound lead me to slightly different types of music. The sample drum kits on the 101 subconsciously steer me towards other drum patterns than I would create on the Syntakt. And those Juno pads that you can play and leads, they kind of make me gravitate more towards synth waves and similar genres. Whereas on the Syntakt, I'm pulled in other directions instead. And although I like the sound of both of them, objectively, I think the MC-101 has the edge. But subjectively, for me, I'm drawn more towards the gritty sound of the Syntakt. With playability, I mean how they invite you to play and perform with them live, how they can be used as an instrument, and how they can inspire you and help you be more creative or stumble over happy accidents and things like that. To me, this is an essential aspect of why I love grooveboxes so much, because at the end of the day, this is about making music. So the question is, do these devices inspire you to make more music, or to make music differently? And ultimately, do you enjoy using them? So now would probably be a good time to tell you the obvious, which is you don't need any of these devices to make music. Whatever device you're using right now to watch this video is perfectly suitable and probably less limited than any of these grooveboxes. The reason why I think you're using hardware to make music, at least why I'm using hardware, is because I find it more fun. It's just more tactile, you know? Twisting a real knob? Oh, I mean, who can say no to this fader? They even have different colors. Both the MC-101 and the Syntakt have unique and really fun features. Let's start with the Syntakt and arguably its most distinctive feature, which is Control All. This is a feature that lets you control a parameter across all 12 tracks at the same time. And just a quick warning, you can sometimes really mess things up by doing so. So one piece of advice is to always hit Funk Yes before you start to twist some knobs, because that creates a temporary save points that you can then go back to if you mess up. Now I'm gonna play a pattern from the latest jam that we did on the Syntakt, which is called Oasis. And now what I can do is I hold down the track button, and then I can basically twist any knob on any parameter page. So like, let's just open up the filter, for example. What's happening now is that every single track is opening up their filters. I can also take it down. I can increase the envelope. And so this is a way to create some really cool things. I can also reduce the probability of notes playing. So now there's a 50% chance of notes playing. And then I can maybe, I don't know, add some reverb, add some delay, and then pull up the filter. And then I can time things so I can go back to the saved state. So I just held Funk No to go back to the previously saved state. I find that this feature really helps you discover more parts of your song, and it can really help you identify how the song might evolve over time. I use this feature all the time as an idea generator. Sometimes it also helped me discover new sounds that I save as new presets. Of course, both of these devices allow you to change parameters on the fly on a single track using the encoders. So you have 4 knobs here on the MC-101, and you have these 8 endless encoders on the Syntakt. And here's a little tip on the MC-101. You can set it up so that by holding these 4 buttons at the same time, you can switch the knob mode from single to multi. And multi means that one knob controls one track. So now, for example, I can control the filter cutoff on all of the 4 tracks at the same time. So technically you could do something similar to Control All with a hand movement like this, where you sort of open up the filter on all tracks at the same time. But yeah, it's way easier on the Syntakt. Also on the Syntakt, any parameter on the whole synth machine can be modified in real time. On the MC-101, it's just a subset of predefined parameters like decay, filter cutoff, things like that you can change. Now, the MC-101 has a few other tricks up its sleeve when it comes to live jamming. First of all, it has a master effect which can be configured to one of the 50+ effects. I'll give you one example here too. So here's how the pattern sounds. So all I can do now is I I hit this multi-effect button, and then I can start to twist some knobs to get some interesting effect. This is the phonograph multi-effect, and there are plenty of other effects to choose from. So this can go as crazy as you want it to. I tend to prefer to just keep it on, it's called a multi-mode filter over here. So it's basically a combination of a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter. It can be super useful. Anyway, so that's just one thing that you can do on the MC-101 again that can be really fun. And then there's the scatter effects. This is something that can be configured to either be master effects or per track effects. That can create some glitchy effects like this. This is altering the drums. I think it's just dirtying up the sound. I think it's some lo-fi compression. Here's some other lo-fi, or I think this is a bit crusher. This does some weird stutter effects. You can configure all of these one by one. You can select which channel they affect, and you can select how they perform. Honestly, it's super hard to configure them, so I've never even attempted it. The only thing I try to do is I try to identify which tracks I want them to act on. Because by default, all of these different scatter effects affect the master channel. Another thing it has is the ability to change sequence orders on the fly. So let me give you an example on the drum track alone. So these are the drums. If I hold down the track number and then hit the back button, it plays the sequence backwards. And you can do this on the fly. You can also have it play in random. So every time you do this, it will be random. So you can't really control things, but it can give you some inspiration, and it can help you come up with new ideas and new transitions that kind of bridges over different sections of the song. So the last thing I'll show about the MC-101 is the ability to temporarily shorten the length of a sequence. And this can be really useful in certain build-up parts of a track. So here's a normal pattern, and I just hold shift and go into sequence. And now I can select that the drum sequence is shorter by tapping on any step here. So now it's just repeating those first 4 steps. But you need to be careful because you can mess up the timing and it can be really hard to get it back to where it was. And if that happens, you need to restart it like this. I'm really just scratching the surface here, and there are more creative features on both of these devices, but I want to focus on my perspective from having used these two in live situations now on YouTube. I feel like where the MC-101 really shines is as a creative sketchpad. And I say this because actually nailing a performance live on this thing is really hard. If you ever watch our jam on this YouTube channel called Elements, you can kind of see what I mean. But if you use it in a sketching phase of a songwriting process, its features really help you sort of get the idea of where you might take the song. And you start to imagine how the final track might sound like. For example, what ear candy you might want to use at different parts of the song by using the scatter effects and things like that. But personally, I would then take that work and record some patterns and finish the job in the DAW instead. Whereas on the Syntakt, I feel like the live performance features were designed to really help you actually perform on stage with a great degree of control of what that sounds like. And so you kind of want to actually rehearse and perfect the performance on it. So I'll give you one more example. Take the fill button. So if I play this pattern on the Syntakt, this is part of the drums from Oasis, and then I hold on this fill page. You can hear how the drums changed only when I held this page down. Sorry, this button down. But you have to carefully program how those alterations will sound. It's not some random button like holding down the track and pressing forward on the MC-101. It's something that you need to set this up, and you need to decide exactly what will happen when you hold down that page. Again, I feel like the Syntakt wants you to program your song and then jam on it live on stage. Whereas I feel like the MC-101 kind of prefers that you just have fun with the song and see where things take you as you jam on it live. The Syntakt is more of a live instrument. The MC-101 is more of a sketch pad, if you ask me. And just to be clear, I'm having lots of fun with both of these devices. I often just load a previous project and jam on it for a few minutes just because it's enjoyable. Let's talk about the workflow differences between these two grooveboxes. Now this is really about how much they're getting in your way and how quickly you can make music on them. Or another measure might be how often you swear when using them. I'll say this right now, that this is the area where I feel like the Syntakt wins hands down. It's almost like the Elektron interface was made to feel like a video game. I often compare the Elektron workflow with Super Street Fighter 2. Once you learn a few shortcuts, you begin to discover patterns and you unlock other skills because you realize that the key combo you just learned to make Ryu throw a fireball is the same key combination that you use to make Dalsin do the same thing. Rather than talking, let me show you. Here's how you make a copy of a pattern, which is a part of a song, let's say. I hold down Funk and I press copy. That copies the pattern into sort of its internal clipboard. And then I select the pattern destination. So maybe the 6 is not lit here, so that means that it's empty. So I select 6, I hold down Funk again and hit paste. So now I made a copy of pattern 5 into pattern 6. So I was trying to be slow there just to show you how it's done. But once you know how it's done, copying a pattern is done in a split second. Funk, copy, pattern 7, paste. So here's the video game analogy. Once you understand that that's the way you copy something, you can begin to experiment with copying other things across the track. So let's say I want to copy 4 notes from the step sequencer. These are the 4 notes that are playing. Let's say I wanted to copy these 4 notes and I would like to paste them over here. What I do is I hold down these 4 trigs and then I press copy. And then I select the destination, start, and I hit paste. So now I made a copy and it sounds like this. And it's so simple. And then you might start to wonder, what happens if I hold down the LFO page? Does that work too? And it turns out that it does. You can copy the parameter settings on any subpage on any synth engine and you can paste it over to another track. And this really saves you a lot of time as you build out your song. Now on the MC-101, these kind of things are much slower. Let's do the copying of the 4 steps in the step sequencer just to show you the difference. So here's that same pattern on the MC-101, except this time it has a very lush and beautiful Roland sound. So I hit the sequence button and then I see these 4 trigs. It's the same trigs as these ones over here. And I want to copy them over like so. On the MC-101, you need to do it one by one. So you need to first push the first step. You need to hold shift and copy. And then you need to go to where you want to paste it. So in this case, it's step 12. Hold shift again, press copy again, which now actually means paste. So you do that and you repeat the process until you're done. Again, here it's copy, paste. So in summary, I'm at least 3 times faster on the Syntakt on almost any workflow related task. And that makes a massive difference when you're sketching out a song idea, because the last thing you want is for this thing to get in your way. Now let's talk about another workflow related thing that makes the Syntakt unique. This is a feature that in my mind kind of blurs the line between the sequencer and the synth, and it's called parameter locking. And it's arguably the most powerful feature of the entire Elektron workflow. It allows you to make tweaks to any synth parameter on a per note basis. So each of these trigs in the step sequencer can be modified. You basically lock the settings of certain parameters to that step, regardless of how you may tweak the pattern in a live jam situation. Let me give you a very basic example first. So let's say I want to change the step on step 14 here. Maybe I want to change the tuning and the decay of this particular step, and I want to add some overdrive to it. And that sounds like this. So you can hear how this step now suddenly sounds different. And you could see how I did that. I just hold down the trig and then I can twist anything. This is just scratching the surface. You can get completely crazy with parameter locking, and you can lock entire sound presets too. Here's an example of one single track playing an entire drum kit through parameter locking. So that's just one track, and then I still have 11 other tracks to go. And I can still jam on top of this if I want to, so I can maybe change the tuning. Add some reverb. And if that didn't sound good, I could just hold funk no and go back to the previous pattern. In contrast, I'd say that the MC-101 has more of a linear sequencer, and I tend to work on it similarly to how I work in a DAW, where it's more of a programming note kind of thing, and then automation is done separately or live. So again, to me, the Syntakt wins hands down here, but I think it probably depends on what kind of music you make. And it might even depend on whether you enjoy programming or not. I'm a computer scientist, so there's a part of me that actually enjoys the programmatic aspects of the Elektron workflow. But I can also see how someone else might absolutely hate that kind of workflow. And it's worth pointing out too that both of these devices support live recording too. So you don't have to enter notes manually in the step sequencer if you don't want to. Like, let's say you already hear in your head what the melody or the drums sound like, you can just use the live recording feature instead. And I'd say in that case, the MC-101 actually has a slight edge, because when it comes to live recording, it's just more enjoyable to hit these pads than to be playing on these kind of clicky buttons. To me, portability is an important aspect of a groovebox. The more portable it is, the more I will use it. And to me, that doesn't mean taking it with me on a train or a bus or anything like that. It really just means portability around the house. Both of these devices can be USB power bank powered, but the Syntakt requires a PD compatible power bank and a USB-C to 12 volt DC plug. None of my power banks work, so I have to bring the power cable with me. This is one of those small things that make it a little bit less accessible to me. The MC-101 can be powered directly through any USB port using 5 volts, and that means that any USB power bank or your laptop will work just fine. And it can also run on 4 AA batteries. This makes it much more convenient to just grab and go. And as a result of this, the MC-101 is more likely to sit on my bed table or on the kitchen table and so on. And that makes me use it more often. Another aspect to increasing the usage is to compare how quiet they are to use. Or another way of saying it would be, how easily can you get away with jamming on this thing past midnight without upsetting your partner? This is an area where the MC-101 is clearly superior. Its buttons are almost silent when pressing them, and you can't hear anything when you press them. Whereas on the Syntakt, my family can sometimes get upset even if they're not even in the same room, because this thing really sounds loud. And finally, you can already see the size difference, but what you can't see is that the Syntakt actually weighs 3 times as much. Plus, you need to bring a more powerful power bank and or the power brick and cord, so if you plan on jamming outside of your house, for example, the MC-101 is way more convenient to carry with you. Whether studio integration is important depends on what your goal of music making is. If you're just aiming to have fun in the moment and you want a groovebox to jam on live as an instrument, almost like a mindfulness exercise, and you don't really care about music production per se, then you can probably skip this part of the video entirely. But if your goal is to make full tracks that you can share with others, even if it's just your closest friends, or on music streaming services like Spotify or YouTube, then the way that these grooveboxes integrate into your studio or DAW becomes a lot more important. Both devices allow you to record live jams and stem out audio per track. The key difference is that the Syntakt has 12 tracks, plus reverb and delay sends, and then the analog effect blocks and the stereo mains. And the MC-101 only has 4 tracks. So what this means is that in practice, your drums are probably all gonna be in one single track on the MC-101. And that means that you have to spend much more time to mix things properly. There are different ways to go about this. You could either record certain parts of the drum separately in several takes. So if you're on the drum track, you can hold down the track button and press a pad to mute those pads. So you could, for example, mute the kick and the snare and record all the other drum elements, and then maybe you could do the opposite and mute everything else, and that way you could record different tracks for the different drum parts. Or you could attempt to mix as much as you can on the MC-101 itself. It's fairly doable. Each pad has its own EQ setting, so there are ways of doing it. On the Syntakt, their computer software called Overbridge makes this super easy, and it can even work separately from the DAW and just create wave file for each track. So I'd say that both are on par on a technical standpoint, but the difference is the track count. And that means that I have way more control and I can afford to spend more time to finalize a track on the Syntakt. But then again, with just 4 tracks on the MC-101, I tend to move more quickly from the standalone phase of sketching out a song to recording the stems and picking up the production process in the DAW instead. And at that point, the mixing is actually easier since it's just 4 tracks on the MC-101. So that goes back to the point I was making earlier. The MC-101 feels a lot more like a sketch pad, whereas the Syntakt feels more like a tool that you use to create a complete song. But you may use these differently, and so this may not apply to you. So the final category is comparing their overall value. First of all, the elephant in the room. The Syntakt is nearly twice as expensive as the MC-101. So does it really offer twice the value? It really depends. Subjectively, I can understand why the Syntakt is more expensive. It has a much nicer build quality. It's made out of metal, which explains also why it's 3 times as heavy, because this thing is really built like a tank. I think it's much nicer to look at subjectively, and it has much better and cleaner screen, much larger screen, easier to use, and it also has analog oscillators inside. And on the software side of things, it has that incredibly fun and fast Elektron workflow. But then again, the MC-101 is probably the device that will surprise you the most, because it just sounds incredible. I got mine used for around $300 or euros, and I'd say that that's an incredible value for what you get. It actually boggles my mind that this is a bit of a best of Roland boutique synth in one box at this price point. But the build quality is definitely not on par with the Syntakt. I mean, this thing feels super lightweight. The plastic even squeaks sometimes when I grab it. It's not terrible by any means, and I haven't noticed any issues with the pads or the knobs at all. But if I were to guess, I would say that the Elektron will probably last longer and hold its value over time in a way that the MC-101 probably won't. But this really goes back to what your priorities are and why you are looking at these devices in the first place, which leads me to: who are these grooveboxes for? Here's my perspective on it, but you need to decide for yourself if this rings true to you or not. If you're looking for a portable sketchpad to noodle on, to try things out and get inspired by new sounds and new ideas, I'd say that the MC-101 is the clear winner. It's so lightweight and so portable, and it has a number of fun live jam features and effects that can really make you approach your music differently. But if you're looking for a multi-timbral synthesizer, I'd say that both are extremely capable, but only one of them is genuinely fun to do sound design on, and that's the Syntakt. I do sound design on the fly all the time when writing music on the Syntakt. I never do it on the 101, even though the 1.8 firmware update exposes almost the entire Roland Sencore synth engine. It's just not fun to use. If you're interested in sound designing on the MC-101, I highly recommend that you check out Ben Koh's channel here on YouTube. He has a great tutorial for how to tweak the partial editor, which is what it's called on the 101 synth engine. He's also probably one of the most enthusiastic ambassadors for the MC-101 that I've seen on YouTube, so definitely worth checking out. Now let's say you're looking for a sound module, or let's say a preset machine. I would say that that's another area where the MC-101 wins. I could see people buying the MC-101 just because they want some of that retro Roland sounds in their productions. There are literally thousands of presets on the MC-101, and you also get their famous drum machines like the TR-707, TR-606 and things like that. If you're looking for a live instrument that you can use on stage or on YouTube jams, I would say the Syntakt wins hands down. It's just much more immediate, you're much more in control, it's easier to not mess up because you have things like the save points that you can revert back to. I feel like the MC-101 would have been the perfect live performance machine if you were an octopus. I guess an octopus that really loves retrowave. And finally, if you're looking for a device to make full sounding tracks outside of a DAW, I would say that the Syntakt has a clear edge just because it has 12 tracks instead of 4. But it also has an intuitive song mode that makes it super straightforward to arrange a song and create variations of a pattern. You can control how the different tracks are muted on the fly. Now, you can do those things on the MC-101, but just like so many other workflow related aspects, it's just more fiddly and it's less fun to do it on the MC-101, but it can be done. So I hope that was a helpful comparison for you, in that at least you're inching closer to make a decision which one of these is the right device for you. And maybe your conclusion is that none of these is right for you, and you might want to check out the Digitone versus Syntakt comparison. If you're leaning towards this but you're kind of missing the polyphony, that's another option for you. Now, as for myself, I'm keeping both. I'm not going to sell either of them. I love both of them for different reasons. I love the Syntakt because it's so immediate. I love it because it makes sense to jam on it live. It's very easy to record into the DAW. I just love the immediacy of dialing in the sounds that I want. Whereas I'm keeping the Roland because I just love the Roland sound. I just think it sounds great. Polyphony, lush pads, the chorus, all of those things. The Roland has plenty of it. But I'm more frustrated when I use the Roland. I'll be honest. If I could only keep one of these two, I would hold on to the Syntakt. The reason for that is I find the workflow to be such an important aspect of making music on a groovebox. I'm at least 3 times quicker on the Syntakt when it comes to programming stuff in the sequencer, and I spend less time swearing and cursing when I'm using the Syntakt. So I think that counts for something. All right, so we reached the end of this video. Recording a video like this takes a lot of time. So if you enjoy this type of content, I would really appreciate if you hit the like button, and I would also appreciate if you subscribe and let me know in the comment what type of video you would like to see next. Aside from the jams, of course. I mean, we're doing music here, and that's the bread and butter of this channel. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.